this morning on the way back.
We're going live.
Go check on.
This is my page.
Let me refresh the page.
Okay, I think we're live.
Very fun. Well, welcome everybody to Thursdays with Culture Talk. This week, Cynthia and I are here live with two of our favorite certified partners. We're excited to welcome JP Laqueur and Paul Myott of DataBank to join us and have a conversation and share some feedback, thoughts, ideas about the ways that they are using Culture Talk and some of the impacts that they are able to have at their own company at this point. And there's a backstory to that. So I'll start out by introducing them briefly and then letting JP and Paul say a few words and introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about that story. So just sort of like a quick, hats off to JP, who we call our #1 disciple at Culture Talk. It was JP who called us up, I think it was sometime in 2016, and said, hey, I've been watching your work, looking at your website. When can I get certified in Culture Talk? And Cynthia and I had a certification program sort of growing in development behind the scenes and promising it's coming, it's coming. And it was JP's call that got us to put a date on the calendar. So
I'll write a check today.
That's right. So our #1 disciple still with us and still really helping us to grow the impact of this work. One of the ways that JP helped us to grow it is to bring on additional partners like his colleague, Paul. And Paul and JP have a long history of working together, each bringing a really important expertise to the conversation. So Paul brings a background in organizational development and the ability to bring that work in to do change initiatives in companies, paired with JP's background in brand and his consulting company, which is where we first met. Right. Brand Foundations. So tell us a little bit about the history from your perspective.
Sure. So, well, obviously, really excited to be here today. So thank you guys for inviting us. This is cool. Yeah, I mean, as you said, I was running a practice that was around brand and culture sort of integration, but didn't really have a strong culture background and saw the promise of sort of merging those two as a way to leverage, kind of rebrand companies from the inside out, right? Have an external brand that truly reflected the internal culture, and was always looking for ways to sort of bring that out and bring that into the brand work. And then ran across archetypes and found you guys, through that. And so that was really the starting point, was how do I, looking at Culture Talk as a tool to understand a culture in an organization and use that to build a little bit of a brand narrative. And what I loved was that archetypes all had a sort of a narrative element to them, right? And they were real easy to understand. And so it was a great way to capture the culture and reflect it in a brand. Didn't at the time see it as something that would be a tool I would use to actually shape and change culture within organizations, because we weren't there yet as a consulting team. And that's when kind of Paul came into the picture and we reconnected. We were friends for 20 years. And then as he developed his career in organizational development, and I kind of shared with him what I was doing at Brand Foundations, that's when we really started to team up. And he brought that whole other experience to it, which today I think, which really allowed us at DataBank to not only build the brand, but also intentionally shape and develop the culture around it.
Yeah.
So good, but I came at it from a purely brand standpoint.
Brand, right? Which is where you started with DataBank. And before that, with a number of other clients with a focus on the technology space. So tell us a little bit about that experience with DataBank. And Paul, this is where you kind of came into the picture as well. That in itself is a experience that has evolved in its use of archetypes to help solve business challenges.
Yeah. I mean, I'll kind of tee it up. So we came to DataBank after it had done about a year after it had done its first, I guess, significant acquisition in terms of the number of people and from a pure size standpoint, changing the company. And Paul and I collaborated in really doing an inside out sort of rebrand that also resulted in some foundational cultural messages as well that we knew we could build on. We were not full-time employees here yet, but we certainly saw the possibility. And so, we did the typical brand process that we would do and use the CultureTalk organizational survey to understand at the time the different groups within DataBank and how they were similar and how they were different. But we layered on to that some of Paul's expertise, and I'll let him kind of address what he did in that first summer. It was a much deeper dive into understanding the culture and then using the tool to sort of reflect on it.
Yeah, I would say, as with most consulting engagements, it's the mushroom effect, right? You come in for a very acute need, and then very quickly, especially with organizational development and organizational effectiveness, you find that there's multiple other factors at play, right? So what started as really an acute need around a merger or an acquisition that was done, that was still playing out a year and a half later, which was the impetus for why we were brought in, then turned into a larger order initiative around setting the purpose, right? And getting everybody to coalesce around a purpose. And then the natural offshoot of that was culture, right? And brand and culture. So we started off with that, and it was interesting because I've been exposed to, throughout my career, multiple assessment tools, the DISC, MBTI, Enneagram, those things, and they're all very valuable. But one of the things I really, and JP touched on it earlier, one of the things that really attracted me to the CultureTalk approach was the simplicity of it. And it's very easy to identify with just even the visuals, right? So it was a natural extension to weave into our work, and it's now become a cornerstone of a lot of the culture, the communication, the leadership involvement that we have now that's just ongoing, right? So it provided us a great language for culture that everybody can identify with, and it's an exploratory tool, right? So even if you look at it at the individual level versus the organizational level, you learn something. Everybody we've touched with this so far has learned something about themselves through the tool. So it was just a fantastic evolution.
And I think the magic for me of what we unlocked in that initial engagement was taking an organizational survey, using it to understand the culture and develop some good messaging, but that we could then take that and do something with it. And when you combined that understanding and that messaging that we developed, which is still around today, these cultural cornerstones and these leadership behaviors, these sort of 7 values that define the DataBank way, they're still around today, and everything sort of circles around that. But we were able to operationalize that. And so having Paul come in and go, like that summer, you went out and parachuted into a bunch of different offices that had been affected by this recent integration, and did your observations and, interviewed people. And really, so there was a lot of sort of first person, information gathering of what was really going on in the culture that you could balance against what you were seeing in the survey. And it created a depth of understanding of the cultural dynamics that we didn't traditionally have. And so it just made the brand work we were doing that much more powerful, and it fed into that messaging too. And I think that was the real first breakthrough, was like, wow, this can make a huge difference. And then we've just continued to build on that.
The words that you guys have used really resonate with me, and I think it's helpful to, when we think about, it became foundational. It created the common language and the cornerstone. And I have to say, JP, when you say that Paul parachuted into the different places, I was really intrigued by that too. I like the visual of Paul parachuting in. And
that's a hobby for me.
Isn't it?
Skydiving.
Yeah. Gotta have good
consultative skydiving, we call it.
Yeah, right. Right.
But this
Well,
idea,
but again,
think-
like
you
having
have
that was
one
the
assessment
partnership.
and one tool, that can help you to and mushrooming. Paul, another one. You guys have great visual language. This
Right.
mushrooming out
Brand.
from there.
And I'll add operationalizing, right, these ideas
Yeah.
and finding that cornerstone.
Yeah.
One of the other dynamics too that some of your listeners and constituents or stakeholders may identify with is the fact that DataBank, it was an organization, and still to this day is an organization that runs fast, right? Not a lot of layers to it, right? And it requires agility and patience, right? So where maybe in a large organization, you might have a whole team in the HR group or an OE group that takes something like CultureTalk and blends it in and then pushes that forward and makes a lot of progress very quickly. We had to balance the approach with some patience and flexibility, because just like I have a term for this also. It's called parish priest work, and I'm stealing that from an old colleague of mine. It's like one convert at a time.
Mm-hmm.
It took some time for the leadership team to really wrap their brains around, what is this culture effort, and why should we be going down these paths? Why should we be spending time? Why should we be doing the leadership offsites and dedicating half a day, to working on leadership behaviors and culture? We just need to run fast and get things done. Well, that has paid dividends now, because the CEO on down to all his directs and even now their directs, they've all been pretty much indoctrinated into the DataBank way, right? And the leadership team continues to evolve. New players have come in, recent acquisition. We've got a whole bunch of new players, so we had to re-educate, but it gave us a great opportunity to reintroduce CultureTalk, because as we all know, the old marketing and advertising adage, you got to hit somebody over the head 3 times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it gives us an opportunity to reintroduce to those who have already been introduced to it and reinforce, but also acculturate the new, right? So it's just been an ongoing effort to make sure that, we take a step forward, take another step forward, and it's not a big bang approach. So, it just requires a little bit of patience. Yep.
Right.
Yep. But it's also paid off, I think, in our situation.
About that leadership teamwork session. You mentioned the half day, and I know that you both put a lot of effort into getting ready for that and really thinking through the impact. How are we going to, we've talked a little bit about this cornerstone and these cultural behaviors, and tying the individual behaviors to the cultural cornerstones. And I think that the excitement that you guys had coming off of that engagement a couple weeks ago, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what your thinking was going into it and what you're feeling like, the outcomes are coming out of it.
Yeah. So so after that first initial engagement in 2019, and we began to roll out sort of the brand and culture sort of messaging, and then began to operationalize this internally. In the middle of that, at the beginning of really 2020, shortly after rolling that out at the beginning of 2020, we went into the pandemic, right? So now you have an organization that had a couple hundred people remote. And in the midst of that last year, we made another acquisition, which,
just for fun,
was
right?
it? What's that?
I said just for fun, in the middle of a
Yeah,
pandemic.
let's just do another, and that one was much bigger. I mean, transformative. It took the company from maybe 250, 280 employees to, we're probably 650 now. So,
Wow.
more than doubled the company. And all that integration work began, when we announced the deal in September, began towards the end of the year, and all through, from that point into this year, that a lot of that integration work was taking place. A lot of new members of the management team, as Paul mentioned, and it was all done virtually. A lot of it. I mean, in a lot of cases, that full level 1 and level 2 leadership team had never met all together. I mean, we had not all been together since the beginning of the pandemic. So that meeting we did a couple months ago was the first time we could all get together and assess where we were, 7-8 months into the integration. And so our feeling was that the work we had done gave us a really good platform for all the employees that were now coming together as DataBank to understand our culture. Like, it really did help new people coming in to make culture more tangible. You had a set of behaviors and messages around it, but you also had it reflected in rewards and recognition programs and things we were doing on an online culture hub. And, we were bringing it to life. So it made it real. But as a leadership team to coalesce around it too, we needed to do something deeper. And so what we chose to do there was to have everyone on the leadership team do the individual survey and to summarize in one slide kind of what they learned about themselves from that, to roll and sort of roll those results up by teams, because you had all the major departments or teams in the organization represented by that leadership team. And then that was all about building understanding, and then also to apply that in a really real world fashion as they look at their common attributes as archetypes, as individuals, and as a team, to apply that to, hey, these are the big objectives we have to face in the next year. How does our knowledge of who we are affect how we might approach certain real world? So they had already prepared and presented to the rest of the leadership team, here's some big objectives we have for the next year. And so we all had that understanding. And so it was all about building awareness at like sort of three levels: your individual awareness of who I am, right? And that just drives more of the language, gets people comfortable with language and talking about, oh, there's my innocence showing up, or there's my, my hero shadow side, whatever. Awareness of the team, like, okay, so now how's everybody on our team compare, right? And what's kind of our makeup there? And then awareness at an organizational level, like, what are the big things every department's got to do, and how do we respond to this stuff? And so it was all trying to build familiarity and awareness at those three levels, and to do it in one meeting in one day, with the first time a lot of folks had met. And that's kind of the synopsis of it.
Yeah.
But let me add an element to this, right? Just to step all the way back. None of this, even going all the way back a year and a half ago, none of this would have been possible without a CEO who was absolutely bought in and absolutely trusted JP and I, right? But for all of those people listening to this, that is something, especially if you work in HR and organizational change management, organizational effectiveness, that is the absolute requirement for any of the types of initiatives, right? And we had it. We're lucky enough to have it, had a year and a half ago, and still have it today. That's how we got, like I said, a half a day worth of time on this leadership day together to be able to do all of this, right? And that continued commitment from the CEO and now his directs
makes the difference.
Is absolutely essential, and it's going to pave the way for us, for the next evolutionary step, which is to help drive this down through the organization to the next level of leadership and beyond. Right?
Yeah. Yep. A couple of things that occurred to me based on what you guys shared about that day. First of all, the CEO, we call that around here the readiness factor. So when you've got, a team that's ready, but especially it has to be led by somebody at the top who is signing on wholeheartedly, who is not just giving it lip service or checking a box, but really wholeheartedly understanding that you're building a foundation that's going to last us. I think that's critical. And then I think the other thing that's really critical is sort of this, so what, now what? So it's great to do exercises like this, but I love the tangibility that you used to apply it. So asking people to think about what did you just learn about yourself and your team in the context of what you just said was your most important goal for the year. Right. So instead of leaving that day and sort of everyone saying, well, that was a nice exercise, I feel good. It was, I feel good.
Making it real.
I understand what to do with it. And, and to your point, Paul, about there's a next layer coming, right? So I understand what to do with it here at this leadership meeting. Great. But I've got a whole team of people back at the office. Now what? How do I?
That was purposeful too. And we actually had a portion of the day where we said, look, take what we called the big rocks, right? In the beginning of the day, we went through everybody's big rocks. Each department stood up and went through their big initiatives for the coming year, right? And we purposely took that information later on and put it in context and said, okay, based on now what you know about yourself, from the archetypes, what you know about your team members from the archetypes, and what you know about what everybody's priorities are on the big rocks, how do you see the archetypes playing out so that we're more successful in pursuing that and partnering with each other? And again, we did that purposely to tie everything together so that we didn't just do these exercises and then move on to something else. And then, that's it. We
sort of linked the business stuff that we had to talk about, right? What's everybody's objectives? What are the departments doing with the theoretical stuff that we were talking about? I think it's so key with anything that's culture is how do you make it concrete? How do you make it real? How do you operationalize it? I've always come back to the term because it's like, everybody talks about culture, but it's not a tangible thing. And so how do you make it in a way that people can relate to it, can see it as a living, breathing thing? Right. And so that was another example of that, putting this into working these ideas and these messages and these archetypes into the rewards and recognition, creating tools and ways people could go online and see that and share it with each other and recognize those attributes in each other. And building messaging and awareness and campaigns around it that's how you make it real. And then you can also measure it because the benefit of that
everybody wants data, right?
We can come back and I can go on to that online portal and I can measure how many people are recognized each month for, taking extreme ownership, which is a hero, kind of heavily hero, driven attribute, or putting people first, which is about the caregiver, right? And so this is the way we anchored these things in messaging, but also turned it into activities and programs and things that were happening every day, and that we could measure and track the effectiveness of. And I just think that makes it creates the momentum and it takes on a life of its own at that point. And so
there's another concept here too, which I want to introduce, which I learned a long time ago, again, from the same wise colleague that I've gleaned a lot of things from, but this is for your certified partners and anybody listening to this who do this type of work. Don't forget that we are the intervention, right? So JP and I are the intervention. It's not just the culture talk or the tools we introduce, right? So when you step into that room and you introduce something like a culture talk or you do an exercise, you are the intervention and people are looking at you as the change, right? So the fact that we've been able to, garner the trust of the organization and the CEO is absolutely critical, because that lays the foundation for now what we bring to the table and introduce is going to be looked upon as credible, right? And so don't ever forget, I would say, my advice would be, don't ever forget that you are the spearhead of the intervention of the change, right? And then everything that follows with culture talk that you bring to the table relies on that. So just wanted to lay that one out there.
Yeah, absolutely. The expertise, let's use it, you become, it's that trust factor. So somebody's looking to you with the trust factor that what's next, and how to keep this effort sustainable and measurable. Like, how are we going to have the impact that we're looking for? And I think sometimes those two things, the ability to scale it within an organization and then sustain it over time are things that are really important to leaders, because they want to see how it ties back to the business outcomes, and they should.
Right.
And
the other thing too is that you have to make it programmatic. It has to be something, like you said, that has legs, that it extends over time. It's not a one and done thing. And so having people who can lead it, like Paul and I are doing, is key. In our case here, this is kind of run out of marketing, which is a little different, right? We believe right from the very get-go that brand and culture were intimately interwoven, that the outward brand and the success of the marketing was going to be, dependent in a large part on the people and the culture. And it's very heavy communications oriented, right? We think culture it requires a continuous drumbeat of communications. That being said, we have a great partnership in HR too, which supports this, has been integral to all of this, and has really used the framework and all the cultural foundation that we've laid to also help in recruiting and leadership development, right? And all the training and all the other stuff that we're doing. It's a true partnership. And so while, culture as a communications and a brand thing is kind of run out of marketing, it's embraced and it's reinforced not only at the leadership level, by the CEO and the L1 team, but also within HR and a lot of the department heads. So, I mean, it's like there has been a rallying around of the whole concept, which helps to sustain it, keep it going, keep nurturing it. So,
yeah.
JP, I'm curious, when you say HR has embraced it, are they using some of this messaging in, for example, employment brand and recruiting? Are they leaning on the messaging, if you will?
Yeah.
Part of
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think so. There's a couple of places. I think that's one. Another area is in training and leadership development, and building some programs around that reinforce all of these behaviors that are, anchored in the archetypes to begin with. And we have also opened up the idea and sort of packaged up the idea of the individual surveys as something that team leaders can take to their teams and say, hey, we can do a lifeline exercise combined with the individual archetypes. And we've begun to package that up with HR support and sort of like introduce this into the organization as a way to kind of drive it down further, so that, again, there's so many little places you can take it and reinforce it and package it up. And that's, I think, that's what will drive the ongoing success.
Yeah, that's exciting, because I think also where we're seeing partners take it into professional development efforts, there's a lot of depth in the storylines themselves that loan themselves, the self-awareness is the starting point, but then the ability to get more intentional about how I show up and behave and interact and grow are all possibilities.
To that effect, one of the things that we'll also be doing is we actually found, very interestingly enough, we found there was a lot of, people coalesced around the hero archetype. It's a strong primary archetype in our organization, the leading archetype. So what that does is it opens the door for us to go deeper on the hero and create real scenarios for people, just to remind them of how the hero might play out in the organization, and get more educated on it, and apply it to real life scenarios, right? So we know we have big initiatives coming up. We can, fabricate scenarios, based on those initiatives that just educate them further on how the hero might play out on both the positive and the shadow side. So I think that was a really interesting.
You use the word play, and I love that, because that's how I think that one of the reasons that the material is easy. I think we started out saying that introducing the framework itself made things easy because of people's ability to relate. And I think it's also fun to play with the model, because they are stories, and, we've got both sides, the shadow side and the strength of each archetype. So we can kind of use it as a coaching and development tool at the individual level. And, and then we talked about the team level and the organizational level, but all with that same common language. But I just yesterday was midstream in a certification class where we had a chance to pull out the Culture Conversations game, and we're playing. And that's essentially, people sort of lighten up and they relax, and they're learning, but they're also really playing.
Yeah. And I think that helps to personalize it too, because one of the things that's always struck me is that at the organizational level, but also at the individual survey, is how people will come back and be like, wow, especially in the individual one, they're like, yeah, that was really on. I mean, we had a number of people who have done it be like, yeah, that was really, I learned a lot about myself, right? There were things, and but then when you take it one step further and build out those interactions, or take the time to reflect on it and say, how do I see it showing up for me individually? It deepens their understanding of it. And you see other layers to how these archetypes appear that are not the generic ones that, might appeal to everybody, that everybody will recognize, but they're like, they start to get really individualized. So I think it's important to get people to do that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So tell me, yesterday that we were prepping for this and we used the word evolutionary. I think, Paul, it was you who brought that word up. Not a great word. Evolutionary. What's the evolution of this? What's next at DataBank? Where do you see this going, and what's your hope for outcomes?
Well, I would say, we're fast growing, private equity, driven. There'll likely be further acquisitions over time. And so I think I would like to see this become a core tool in that process, or even earlier on. At what point can you start to use it to understand the kinds of companies you're acquiring? We were able in the last one to begin to survey people even before the deal had closed, and like really get a head start on how the integration was going to go. I think that's one area. I think certainly, in leadership development, recruiting, and as the brand evolves, we'll continue to use it and steer, what attributes attract the right customers, what do they most appreciate. And then I think internally, as we develop the organization, the workforce, Paul, there's a lot of areas we can use it there.
Yeah, I'd say along with that, we're going to use this to influence the data bank leadership model that we're putting together right now that came out of that offsite. It's going to be a model we use across the organization for existing leaders plus new hires, and to drive consistency and reliability.
What does it mean to be a leader here? Yeah.
Yep. We're gonna look to drive the CultureTalk instrument further down into the leadership, what we call the level 3 and 4 parts of the organization, right? And then they can use it with their teams. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to dig deeper on the hero archetype and really blossom that out and give people more of a platform with which to understand how they relate to each other and how it plays out in the organization. Yeah, because right now, really, there's been an effort to get the leadership team to run. There's multiple pieces of the business. It's almost like 5 verticals of a business integrated into one company. So the fact that we now more than ever, in order to really hit execution targets, we've got to have those groups all working together and partnering together more than ever. So it just becomes even more of a fabric and relationship building platform for us.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. A lot of organizations are structured that way. And I think it's particularly useful when you have that kind of functional operation to be able to drive that understanding between the functions.
I'd love to see it as part of the recruiting process too. I think there's a lot of opportunity, certainly for key hires initially. I know I've used it on my team when we were talking to candidates to have them kind of go through it and to think about building the teams intentionally, not just based on, skill set that somebody has or, some loose, feelings about somebody, but to have some empirical evidence of like, hey, this person is this archetype that, likely has these kinds of traits, and here's how it fits into the rest of the team. I think that we're a ways away from that, but I think there's something really powerful there for any organization if they really embraced it to very intentionally build teams and the organization as a whole with an eye towards finding the right balance of archetypes.
Right, and I think one of the critical things we suggest around the hiring process is having a better conversation. Hearing that person, the way that they're, whatever stories they're sharing to, round out the resume you got, you're hearing the story from their lens, through their perspective, their lens, which makes all the difference in the world. I love this whole story, this whole data bank story. I would say, Cynthia, this is what we call a full integration of culture.
Immersion.
An immersion, right? We'll talk, from the number 1 disciple to the CultureTalk immersion.
And I would say we really look forward to seeing it continue to unfold and what you are able to accomplish on behalf of the strategy of data bank. And I'll go back to something Paul said, there's tools like CultureTalk. CultureTalk is a tool set. And then there are the people that are using those tools. And Paul, you really underscored how important that is. And I would just share that we actually have a couple of certification programs coming up. So if you're part of a learning and development team, part of a marketing team, if you're an independent consultant or coach that's looking for tools to make culture tangible, you can check out Get Certified at CultureTalk.com, or actually just getcertified.culturetalk.com, and you can look into the program that JP and Paul came through in order to bring this work to DataBank.
Yep, absolutely. So we'll look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas about what JP and Paul have created, and checking in, of course, with both of you in the near future
You
to
bet.
find out how the evolution is continuing.
Absolutely.
It's a journey.
It is a journey. Thank you
It
for
is.
sharing it with us. We're super
You're
excited.
welcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you